Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure, honor to talk to you about this very important subject. I think the first question we need to ask is why we're talking about it. Precisely as the Chair said, if there is no such thing as race, why are we talking about it? And the reason is obvious to any South African, namely the fact that racial prejudice, racial discrimination, racial exploitation have divided our society over many centuries and has caused untold misery to millions of people, more particularly the oppressed people of this country. So from that point of view, therefore, it's a very relevant question to ask, can we overcome racial prejudice? Can we overcome racial attitudes which keep us divided, which make some people believe that they are superior to others, and so on? And what role can the school play in that regard? And I think the very first thing we should stress, and it was implicit in what Professor Waching said, namely, the school reflects what goes on in the society at large. It doesn't reflect it accurately, doesn't reflect it exactly, but there's no way that the school can escape from being a reflection of what is going on in society at large. And for this reason, it's very important to ask whether there is a commitment in post-apartheid South Africa, both at the level of government and at the level of civil society, at the level of ordinary people, to get beyond race, to get beyond racism, beyond racial discrimination. Is there a real commitment? Constitutionally, we are obliged, in terms of Section 1B of the Constitution of this country, we are supposed to be trying to establish a non-racist, as it's called in the Constitution, a non-racist and non-sexist society. So constitutionally, there's an obligation on all of us, including the government, of course, to do that. But the question that we have to ask is whether there is a genuine commitment on the part of government as well as civil society. Because I'm not one of those who believe that government, A, must be blamed for everything and B, must do everything. I believe that we have power and we need to make use of the power that we have in order to initiate change, in order to bring about the things that we want. So that's the first point. And I would therefore say that certainly the schools, as one of the most important modern institutions for the reproduction of society, the schools have a central role to play. And if in the schools we are unable to bring about the conditions that we're talking about, conditions where non-racialism, anti-racism are being promoted, are being established, consolidated, and so on, if we fail at that level with our youth, then the future is an extremely bleak one for all of us. Now, I think the first, when we come to practical issues, first thing we have to understand, and we're not going to speak about that at great length tonight, is this issue of inequality that was referred to earlier by the Chair. Unless there is a serious strategic thrust in our society to reduce and even to eliminate the gulf between the rich and the poor, between the haves and the have-nots, racial inequality is going to be reproduced in South Africa for a very long time to come. Because the capitalist society in which we live reproduces racial inequality, not only class inequality, it reproduces racial inequality, even though today there's a sprinkling of so-called black people in the upper strata, upper layers of our society. In spite of that, the particular way in which the capitalist system works, it reproduces in South Africa, in post-apartheid South Africa, racial inequality. So therefore, I think the assumption, the common understanding amongst us must be that there has to be a commitment to reducing or even eliminating social inequality, that gulf between the rich and the poor. If we can accept that, and by the way, we can't accept it without further ado. We've got to interrogate it, we've got to question it, we've got to be very critical about what government and others, business as well as civil society, what all these elements are doing about reducing racial and social inequality. So we don't take that for granted, but if we can take that for the moment and leave it aside, then as far as education is concerned, as far as the schools are concerned, there are some very practical things that we can and should do. And the first one is at the material, physical level. Where are new schools being located? Where are they being situated? In a metropolitan city like Cape Town. If we are simply going to continue establishing schools in the ghettos, in the townships, in the locations and so on, we are simply going to continue reproducing that racial pattern of urban planning that we've inherited from the apartheid past. So I'm not going to go into detail, I'll come back to that in discussion, but that's the first step that needs to be considered. How can we locate the schools in such a way that the best schools are those to which people want to come? Everybody wants their children to go to those schools. I'm talking about public schools, I'm not talking about private schools. People want their children to come there in such a way that they are accessible to all children, regardless of where they may be staying. The second point, which I need to add immediately, we mustn't mistake color. Or let's put it the other way, we mustn't mistake the notion that non-racialism means that you have a group of people consisting of people from different so-called racial backgrounds, from different color backgrounds, if you wish. Even if you have, let's say, in deep rural KwaZulu-Natal or deep rural Transkei, you have people, Xhosa or Zulu-speaking people, black people. That group of people in that school can be non-racial, despite the fact that there's not a single person of any other color, quote unquote, in that particular school. Why? Because non-racialism is not a mixture of colors. Non-racialism is an attitude of mind. We've got to promote a particular attitude of mind in order to orientate children, adults, towards being non-racial, towards an anti-racist attitude. And unless we understand that, we're going to get to the absurdities, many absurdities that we see every day in our society, where people mistake multiracialism for non-racialism. I remember a photograph in the mid-80s sometime, in one of the newspapers at the time, which showed a big photograph of a big audience with people from different backgrounds, and it said, a shot or something to that effect of the non-racial audience. How did they know it was a non-racial audience? They simply assumed because they were people from different quote-unquote color backgrounds that it was non-racial. What they really meant was multiracial in their terms. Because non-racialism, let's say, is an attitude of mind, and that is what we need to promote, regardless of where our children come from. The third point I want to make is that the schools can do all kinds of practical things themselves in order to promote this non-racial approach, this non-racial understanding of life. One of the things we must do is to make it possible for our children on a regular, organic basis, not artificial, on a regular, organic basis to come together, to socialize, to be together, whether it's in sport, in music, in whatever. Extramurally, intramurally, we need to bring them together, they need to get to know one another, they need to be with one another, and actually understand that there is absolutely no difference amongst them, regardless of what their particular background may be. And the fourth thing that, in my view, the schools can do and should do, is seriously to promote multilingualism. If you learn the language of other people, and you can speak the language of other people, in our case, in the Western Cape, it's a question of Afrikaans, isiXhosa, and English, mainly. Some Sesotho as well. If all our children are able to speak those three languages, to use those three languages, the channels of communication amongst them become completely natural. And ideas about prejudice, racial prejudice, about inferiority and so on, those ideas are minimized, they become irrelevant. If somebody knows that I can speak isiXhosa and he or she is not very fluent in English for argument's sake, and addresses me in isiXhosa, I can respond in isiXhosa or in Afrikaans, whatever it is. Obviously, the bridges that are built in that way make communication, make understanding so much easier. Whereas if we don't do that, and unfortunately most of our schools do not do that at the moment, if we don't do that, we simply create these walls of prejudice, walls of division, continue to divide our children. And then I think there are other issues like notions of beauty, for example, aesthetics, notions of beauty. You know, we grow up with the most absurd ideas about what is beautiful, what is good looking, and what is attractive, sexually attractive, and so on and so forth. I don't want to go into all that kind of stuff. But what I do want to say is that we must speak about these things openly. We must begin to address them in debates in our schools openly. What is beautiful? President Nyerere of Tanzania in 1965 banned the beauty contest. So when he was asked, how can you ban a beauty contest? He said, why should we have beauty contests? We are all beautiful. We are all beautiful. I'll tell you more about that later on in the discussion time. But the important point I want to make is that it's necessary to question these absurd notions about beauty and so on. If you extend that to people who are handicapped, who have some, some hindrance that makes them different from other people, then clearly your idea of what is beautiful, what is normal, and so on, that idea becomes either a very dangerous idea, or it can become a very beautiful, a very positive idea. So that's something that we need to address very, very directly in our schools. And we shouldn't be afraid of taking up the most difficult questions and discussing them openly. I want to end off by saying that as far as the practical issues of non-racialism are concerned, we need to embed these things, all the things that we're talking about here this evening, and I'm sure my panelists, partners in the panel will speak about many other aspects of this. All these things we're speaking about need to be embedded in a new set of values. We're growing up in the most brutalized society. We're growing up in a society where everybody wants to be on top, where everybody thinks that to be on top is to be better than everybody else, to be the best, and so on. We need to smash that idea. We need to understand that everybody needs to work together in order to bring about good things in the world. And that even when I shine, when I'm excellent in one particular area, it's because I'm particularly specialized in that area. Other people are specialized in other areas, and all of us together can bring about what is good in the world. We need to understand that more is not better. We need to understand that it's important to say to ourselves that enough is enough. Enough is as good as a feast, as the English saying goes. You don't want more in order to show that you are better. Why should you have 5 motor cars when one will do? Why should you have a palace when an ordinary house will do? These are the important questions. And yet we are made to believe that if we can pronk, as we say in Afrikaans, we can preen ourselves as, with beautiful clothes, beautiful motor cars, beautiful houses, that somehow we are better than others. That's all nonsense. But that is the brutal society in which our children are growing up. And I'm saying that to talk about non-racialism and all these beautiful ideas that we're talking about this evening, without embedding them in a new set of values, in the end, it won't make any difference unless that set of values will be what we want to, unless that set of values itself takes root amongst all our children. I think all the questions, including the very last contribution, revolve around the fact that those in our society who have power shape the consciousness of the people. Whether it's the political power, the power of the media, or the symbolical power, the power of the universities, of the schools, and so on, we shape the consciousness of the people. And the responsibility of those who have power in the New South Africa is extremely great. And the only way that we can, as oppressed people, the only way we can make our own desires and our own interests become the center of activity is by resisting things that we reject. So the last contribution was very much in line with what I want to say. I think there are very clear things. For example, these boxes that we have to tick in official forms, I've never ticked them. And I refuse. And I think everybody should refuse to tick them. If you don't believe in race, if you think that racial categories undermine the democracy and undermine the dignity for which we all fought in this country, don't tick those boxes. Secondly, I think the universities have the task, and the schools for that matter, the principals, the schools, the unions, they have the task to challenge government, to speak truth to power, as we say, to challenge government, to revisit, reconsider this whole issue of racial categorization in the New South Africa. Whether it's the Employment Equity Act, affirmative action, it doesn't matter what particular piece of legislation it is. It's not about race, it's not about color, it's about disadvantage, it's about inequality. And that's what's got to be addressed, not the color of people's skin. You're not disadvantaged because you're black. I feel insulted if somebody tells me that the color of my skin disadvantages me. What the hell? It's nonsense. I have been disadvantaged because I went to a school, not in my case by the way, but most of our children went to schools where there were no resources, where teachers were underprepared, undertrained, and so on and so on. That's the reason, not because they were black. So I think it's important for us to understand that unless you resist these things practically, unless we resist these things, we are simply talking. And talking is not going to get you anywhere. Only action does. And I really honestly feel that, these kinds of meetings are the beginning of getting people to realize that they have power. They have power. But they must know how to use that power in a responsible way, in a way that forces government, forces those who have official power to take notice and to revisit these fundamental issues of our society. I say again, I've never ticked those boxes under apartheid. I never ticked them under post-apartheid South Africa. And I don't care a damn. I leave it to the officials who think it's their task to decide what I am. I know what I am. I'm a human being, I'm a South African, and I'm an African.